So today I'm going to be looking at the various concepts that you wanted me to go over. So how to read a hypnogram, REM versus NREM sleep, the brainwaves, and the symptoms of sleep deprivation. So the brainwaves is the first thing we're going to be looking at today. So the first one we need to be looking at is beta brainwaves. And these are the brainwaves that are associated with us being awake and alert, and it involves some sort of mental activity that you would engage in during normal waking consciousness. They're also present when you have you're stressed, or you have anxiety, or there's a threat or fear, and this is usually because you need to be more alert during this time, so your brain is really active. Now it says here that the brain is actually active when, so beta brainwaves are actually present during this period of sleep. However, this is not true. It's actually beta-like brainwaves. So they're brainwaves that are very similar to beta, but they're called beta-like. So in dreaming, we go through beta-like brainwaves. The next brainwaves that we're going to be looking at is alpha brainwaves. And alpha brainwaves are present when you are mentally and physically relaxed and you're internally focused, and you tend to have a sort of rhythmic sort of pattern to the brainwaves. And you'll notice there that it's very, it's up and down, but there's some sort of pattern to it. And these are usually when you're awake or physically relaxed, or even during light meditation. Theta brainwaves is most common when we are drowsy, such as when we're just falling asleep or just before waking. It can also be through deep meditation, and it can also be when you're creating something. So if you're doing some artwork, you might engage in theta brainwaves. Delta brainwaves are most common with deep dreamless sleep or unconsciousness, and they tend to appear at the start of stage 3 and then move into stage 4, which is the deeper sleep. These are sometimes known as slow waves. Right? And the reason why they're slow waves is because they do have a very slow pattern to them. So we happen to have a look at the different brain waves here. You can see that we have, the beta are all pretty much close together. They're very small, so they have a low amplitude and high frequency, so they're very close together and very small. Alpha waves are a little bit bigger, but they are still a low amplitude. Theta brainwaves, they tend to be spread further apart, so they're slower in frequency, but they are higher and lower. And you might actually experience situations where it's very close in this direction as well. Delta waves, otherwise slow waves, tend to be very high, very low, but they tend to also be very slow. They're not as grouped up together as the other ones. So how to read a hypnogram. So if we happen to have a look at this hypnogram here, right? Hypnograms are what's shown on the EEG when we're looking at the differences between NREM and REM sleep periods. So this is the first one that I happen to have done, and you might remember this from class. If you happen to look here, this person has gone to bed at 10 a.m. There is a cycle here, there's a cycle here, there's another one here, and you sort of get the point. As the night progresses, NREM stages get smaller, but the REM gets bigger. So you can see here that the REM is quite small on this one, but it gets bigger as the night progresses. Right? You might also have periods where you wake up. So these ones here, and that might be because you are, going to the toilet perhaps, or maybe even that, you've heard a sound and then all of a sudden you've woken up. So let's move on. All right, so let's do one together, and I'm just going to break this down a little bit further. This person here has gone to bed at 11 o'clock. you might notice that it's about 6:30 here where they are waking up. So this is their wake up period right here. What's interesting about that is that's 7.5 hours, so we know automatically that it's most likely going to be an adult, and it's most likely going to be somebody who is having an interesting night's sleep. So let's have a look at how we break it down. So the first one, we're breaking it down into the cycles. So remember, most people have 4 to 5 cycles per night. And in this person, they've had 5 cycles between 11 o'clock and I'd say about 6:30. That's my guess anyway. Right, so if we have a look at this, we're going to highlight the areas where the person has woken up in the night and when they have various other stages. So this bit here is when they are awake, so they've woken up. They've woken up here very, very briefly. They've woken up here, and we're going to assume that they've woken up eventually at 6:30. Let's change that up and indicate where the REM periods are. So there's the REM period. There's another one. There's another one there. There's one there, and I forgot this one right here. So they're the REM periods. So we know that the REM periods are the green. We know that the wake periods are the yellow. Now, when we're looking at this, we're going to add a different color. Let's go blue because I like the blue. We're going to look at stage 4. So here's stage 4 right here. And you'll notice that in the first cycle, the stage 4 is actually quite big. So it's quite big here. But it gets smaller as the night progresses, almost to the point that after cycle 3, you no longer have stage 4 sleep. And we're going to add an orange to look at stage 3. So stage 3 sleep is usually a transitional sleep before you go into deeper sleep, and it is very brief. But you can see that they happen almost through about half the night, but once again, by about cycle 3 or 4, it starts to disappear, and cycle 5 you don't have it at all. So this is the thing that we need to look at first. So first up, you work out how many hours they've actually slept. You look at how many cycles they've had in the night, where they've woken up, what their REM stages are, and what's happened with their NREM stages. So when you're looking at the hypnogram, you start off when they're awake. And we're going to just change that color, apologies. So it goes down into falling asleep. So this is when you're falling asleep right here. This is when you're falling asleep. You're going to stage 1, then you're going to stage 2, down to stage 3, then down to stage 4, and you're actually staying in those stages for a little bit. So most people tend to think that you go from stage 4 into REM. That's incorrect. What ends up happening is you go back upwards. So you go backwards through the stages. And you don't go into stage 1, you go straight into REM. And you know I'm terrible at drawing on this thing. So you go into REM at that point. So you skip stage 1 and go straight into REM. Same sort of thing here, right? You go back down, and I'm not going to do that whole thing for you, but you sort of get the idea. This person hasn't gone into REM there. They've gone back down. What's interesting, and if you notice this, because this person has woken up, they have to go back into stage 1. And this person, once again, so you can see there is stage 1 right there and right there. So they've gone into it from waking up. Same sort of thing here. After woken up, they have to go back through to stage 1. What you also need to take note of is if there were a lot of awakenings throughout the night, that would indicate that they are going to be an elderly individual, because an elderly person tends to get up throughout the night. So we've got a lot of awakenings. This person's most likely going to be an adult. If it was a teenager, I'm going to assume that you guys, because I've listened to you guys, are going to be going to sleep at about 2, which is bad, but still. All right, so this is what a hypnogram sort of looks like. So when you're reading a hypnogram, you should first break it down into its various cycles. Then note when they went to sleep and when they woke up, how many hours sleep they received, examine how they have moved through the sleep cycles, how many awakenings have occurred, how many REM periods. Note that the length of the REM periods increase throughout the night, whilst the amount of time spent in NREM decreases. So you should keep track of that. So as the night progresses, you have more REM sleep. And because you're having more REM sleep, you're going to have less NREM sleep. The amount of time spent in NREM stages 3 and 4 also decreases as the night progresses. The elderly tend to have more awakenings, which I spoke about before. They sleep less hours and have less NREM stages 3 and 4 as they age. As they get older entirely, they skip stages 4 completely. They never have it. But this is, it happens later in life. So NREM versus REM. Now, I know the table's small, I apologize. So we're going to do some highlighting on this one. So we're going to look at NREM stage 1, and a lot of people tend to get this one confused because, and I don't know why, but NREM is non-rapid eye movement. You should know this by now, but still. So the EMG is what we're going to be looking at first. And it will show a decrease in muscle tone and activity. It'll show some slow rolling eye movements. There's overall slowdown, but the alpha and theta brainwaves are what you're going to see in stage 1. Your heart rate's going to decrease, respiration's going to decrease, and body temperature decreases. So it's going to head down to at least 1 degree less than what you are normally, but this current point in time, it's just reducing. You're also going to have a low arousal threshold. This means that you are going to take very little to wake up. It could be the sound of a car driving by that wakes you up. You can dream in NREM stage 1, however, it's rare. All right, stage 2 NREM. The EMG is going to show little muscle tension or movement. The EOG, so it's measuring the eye movements are going to stop. You're going to have overall, in the EEG, overall slower brain waves, and it's going to be theta. You might also have sleep spindles in stage 2 and K complexes, which is not actually on there. It is the true onset of sleep. So if you happen to see a question that says, what would be an indication that you're in stage 2? You might say sleep spindles, you might say K complexes, or if the question's asking what is the stage where it's the true onset of sleep, it is stage 2. So this is when you are asleep. Your breathing is more regular, the heart rate is slower, and the body temperature continues to decrease, but only slightly. Once again, it's very easy to wake up, but you might need a little bit more than what you did in stage 1. Once again, dreams are a possibility, but very rare. Stage 3, NREM sleep, you're having less muscle tension and movement in the EMG. The EOG will show no eye movements. You'll have theta and increasingly delta. Once again, stage 3 is a transitional stage. Your breathing will continue to be slow and regular. Your heart rate continues to drop, and your body temperature continues to drop. Your threshold, or your arousal threshold, will be higher than stage 2, but lower than stage 4. Right? You're still going to be pretty groggy if you get woken up during this point, but it takes quite a lot of, pushing and shoving to wake you up. I'm skipping all this section here at the end because it's not really going to help you in the long run. Alrighty, so stage 4, your muscles are completely relaxed. There's barely any movement. You're completely at ease. There are no rapid eye movements. You're going to have delta waves. When it comes to your heart rate, it's very similar to stage 3. It's going to be at its lowest and most rhythmic in regards to everything that's going on internally. It is going to be very difficult to wake you up in stage 4 because the arousal threshold is quite high. It takes quite a lot for you to be woken up. Dreams are a possibility, more so than the other 3, but the problem is going to be they're not going to make any sense whatsoever. With REM sleep, this is rapid eye movement. Now, this is a lack of muscle tension, and you'll almost appear totally relaxed or paralyzed. Sometimes they call REM sleep the paradoxical sleep because your brain waves are almost like they're very active. It's almost like you're alert and awake, but you're not. Your body is actually completely still. You're going to have spontaneous bursts of rapid eye movements, funnily enough, because it's called REM. Your breathing rate is going to be faster. It's going to be irregular. Your blood pressure is going to rise, and this is during your REM. But your body's going to be completely still, and that's why they call it paradoxical sleep. Dreams are very common in REM sleep, and it's going to follow a logical idea. If you ever remember a dream, it's because you woke up during a REM sleep cycle. Alright, symptoms of sleep deprivation. I got this question a lot, and a lot of you seem to struggle with this one on the hurdle task. So, the physiological and psychological effects of sleep deprivation. Physiological effects, the most common ones that are going to come up are fatigue, drooping eyelids, inability to focus the eyes, lack of energy, and headaches. They're the most common symptoms of physiological symptoms of sleep deprivation. Now, before we all get started on, all these things I can't remember, the first thing you should do if you ever see the word physiological is highlight that sucker. Highlight it to the end of the degree. You need to make sure that you remember that physiological and psychological are not the same thing. So many people lose marks for this. Alrighty, so what you'll need to do is remember those ones specifically. I'm not saying about the SAC, I'm just saying in general. So the psychological effects are broken down into 3 different categories. The affective, so the emotions. I like to remember it with the F. Because it's got an F in affective, I tend to remember it as feelings. The more common one is going to be the mood changes. You're also going to have the anxiety and depression, irritability, and a lack of motivation. Think of all the times that you have lost sleep and you're just so tired that you just can't be bothered doing anything. And you go off at your parents or your siblings because, well, you just haven't slept well. Behavioral are your observable actions. And these are things that if I saw you in the class and you were doing these things, I would instantly recognize these as behaviors. It is not something that you might interpret. It is something that you can physically see. So you can see that people have slower reaction times, that they're clumsy, that they take more risk-taking behaviors because they haven't really thought it through. Right? Clumsiness is one of the ones that they look at, as well as slower reaction times. Now, cognitive, these are your thoughts. This is a lack of concentration, comes up a lot. Impaired memory, irrational thoughts, but the most common one that will come in is poor decision making and difficulty with simple or monotonous tasks. So you might make silly decisions, you might be unable to concentrate, which does come up quite a bit, but you also may struggle to do simple sort of tasks. It actually becomes quite difficult to do the simple task because, well, you can't concentrate on it. So when they're looking at the physiological and psychological effects, usually they relate it to a scenario. If you're relating it to a scenario, don't just write down these particular symptoms because they're the symptoms. You have to relate it to the scenario or it doesn't count. It has to be present in the scenario for you to actually include it. All right, so sleep across the lifespan. All right, so let's have a look at this one here. And this was actually, I've stolen this from Ed Rollo. Thanks, guys. If we happen to have a look at this, you can see that a newborn baby, right, is sleeping approximately 16 hours a day, which is good for them. Then as they get older and they're into the 1 to 2 year olds, right, they start going down to about 14 hours a day. And it just slowly goes down. So if you happen to have a look, it goes down to about 12 and a half hours, maybe 13, right, at the age of 2. Then you have a look here, at the age of 2 to 10, goes from there and it goes down. So you got about 12 hours to about 10. So as they get older, the amount of sleep that people need goes down. Then we start having adolescence, so 10 to 20, and once again, we're looking at 8 hours to about 7.5. So in that time, 7 to 8 hours is normal, if not up to 9, but that's a bit iffy on that one. So 20 to 50, so adults, tends to be fairly straight on that one there. It doesn't tend to change very much. We're looking at about 7 to 8 hours per night. With older adults, theirs is pretty steady, and then they get to about 75, and the less sleep they need as they age. Let's have a look. So this is the one that I did in class, and if you happen to have a look at it here, you'll notice that the amount of NREM sleep is quite high in the younger younger ages, but it does tend to go down as you increase in age. If you look at the problems here, so at this point, puberty, when you're going through school, you're using your brain more. The restoration theory would suggest that, right, because you're going through more stress and more information needs to be inputted into your little brains, you might spend more time in REM. And the N on that one has actually disappeared. So I do apologize for that. I'm just going to add it. There we go. Very pretty. Alrighty, so if you happen to look at that, the other one was actually a better indication because it's less confusing. Alright, so the age and amount of hours of sleep. This is something that a lot of people got wrong just because they didn't do their maths. So the babies, you have approximately 16 hours of sleep. 1-year-old toddlers tend to be 12 to 13 hours. 3 to 5-year-olds tend to have 10 to 12. Teenagers, 9 to 10. That's what you should be getting. You're not, but that's not the point. Adults should be getting 8 hours approximately, and then the elderly 5 to 7. Now, according to the restoration theory, that's because the elderly are not as active as what they once were, so they don't need to actually sleep as long. But it's just a theory. The NREM versus REM in regards to proportion of sleep, when they're saying proportion, what they're talking about is percentage of sleep, and this is the same sort of one that I showed before. So babies should be getting 50% REM and 50% NREM. Childhood to adulthood is 20 to 80%, and then elderly 15 to 85. And I can't believe I have to say this, but it should equal 100 people. So 15 plus 85 equals 100. There shouldn't be an odd number here. I know I shouldn't have to say it, but I am, because it happens. Make sure it adds up. Alrighty. Any questions, just let us know, and we'll be more than happy to help you.